Good evening and welcome, everyone. My name is Melinda Lang, and I'm a Senior Curatorial Assistant at the Whitney. As we begin, I'm happy to share that tonight's program is being live captioned in English. You can enable these captions by clicking the CC button at the bottom of your Zoom screen or on the three dots, also on the bottom of your screen. Thank you so much to Sign Nexus for the live captioning. I'd like to start by acknowledging that I'm speaking to you from the Whitney Museum, which is located in Lenape-Hoking, the ancestral homeland of the Lenape. The city that is today known as New York inspired many of Hopper's pictures, and his life and work there is a subject of our program tonight. The name Manhattan comes from the word Manhatta, meaning island of many hills. Our current site is close to land that was a Lenape fishing and planting site called Sappaconnacan, or tobacco field. We acknowledge that the displacement of this region's original inhabitants and the Lenape diaspora that exists today. As a museum of American art in a city with vital and diverse communities of Indigenous people, we recognize the historical exclusion of Indigenous artists from the Whitney's collection and program. We are committed to addressing these erasures and honoring the perspectives of Indigenous artists and communities as we work for a more equitable future. I encourage everyone to take a moment to acknowledge the Indigenous lands from where you're tuning in. This program series provides an opportunity to hear from Whitney curators about their experiences organizing exhibitions at the museum and offers you space to ask your own questions about the art, artists, and ideas behind the shows. Tonight's event is being recorded and will be posted to our YouTube channel if you'd like to rewatch or share. It is my absolute pleasure to introduce tonight's program, the latest edition of Ask a Curator, which focuses on Edward Hopper's New York, an exhibition I was very lucky to work on. And I'm particularly thrilled to introduce Kim Conaty, the Whitney's Stephen and Anne Ames Curator of Drawings and Prints, who organized the exhibition and led the curatorial team valiantly, I should say. Kim will begin with an overview of the show and an inside look at how this project came into fruition. As a member of the curatorial team for this exhibition, I will be joining Kim for a bit of the conversation during the presentation and also at the end of the program for our Q&A. Kim and I are very excited that the exhibition is now open just as of last week, and it will remain on view through March 5th. We are looking forward to sharing some of the stories and thinking and planning around Edward Hopper's New York, the first exhibition devoted to Hopper's life and work in the city that he called home for nearly 6 decades. If you'd like to submit a question at the end, please do so using the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. You can submit questions during the talk, and we will select a handful of them to answer at the end. Thank you again so much for joining us, and I'll now hand it over to Kim.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. As Melinda mentioned, we're really excited to be here tonight talking about Edward Hopper's New York. And there's truly no better place to be looking at and experiencing these works than here downtown at the Whitney, where many of the works that we'll see tonight were created. Only blocks from here where Hopper's longtime studio and residence in Washington Square was located, and is really only blocks south of the Whitney today. And I think we'll see also how many of his works depict, often in unexpected ways, connect us with the past and present of our city. I will start by giving just a quick look at the opening gallery of the exhibition while we kind of begin the program tonight. We're obviously not in the galleries right now, but we are speaking to you from the Whitney, as Melinda mentioned. So this is Edward Hopper's New York here on the 5th floor of the Whitney. I'm going to start now by really trying to set the scene with the exhibition. And here we are in this work on Hopper's rooftop on Washington Square. This is one of the rare and beautiful watercolors that's on display in the exhibition. And we wanted to kind of start here as a way of, as I mentioned earlier, really setting the scene and seeing that Hopper's New York was not necessarily the picture postcard New York that one often thinks about, but it was a very personal New York. He loved these sort of out of the way places. And in this case, this watercolor of his rooftop, where he's much more drawn to the almost the abstraction in the compositions of the city's infrastructure than he is and necessarily the ornament or decoration on the outside of buildings that we're intended to be seeing. And so we will move from here to really talk again about this idea of this being Hopper's New York, a personal vision of the city. So here you're seeing Hopper's self-portrait painting from the mid-1920s. And this is one of the only mature self-portrait painting that he made, depicting himself in his Washington Square studio. And on the right, you have a photographic portrait of Hopper taken by the photographer George Platt Lynes. And in the background, through the window, you can see Judson Memorial Church. So you really see Hopper kind of sited here in Washington Square. Both of these works are part of the Whitney's holdings. And I'm going to use this as a segue for a brief refresher about the Whitney's quite astounding collection of Hopper's work. As you see here, the Whitney has in its holdings over 3,000 artworks by Edward Hopper, which makes the Whitney the largest repository of the artist's work in the world. And this includes a number of paintings, but the vast majority of works here are drawings, which really allows us to see the process that Hopper undertook in his really both looking at the world around him and also preparing for his paintings. We also have, as of 2017, in a recent gift to the museum, a wonderful archive, the Sanborn Hopper Archive, which includes nearly 4,000 items. These are personal items, not artworks, and include everything from correspondence, journals, a number of his illustrations and advertising work, photographs of Edward and his wife Josephine, and ticket stubs, as we will talk about later. Really, through these materials, we were able to have a wonderful foundation for this exhibition. And the other key piece of putting together the exhibition was to give a real sense of place and to try to allow our visitors to get a little bit of a sense of what New York actually felt like during Hopper's time. Of course, New York, I always think of New York as this palimpsest. It's, history is built upon history. So many aspects of Hopper's New York are still here around us. I'm kind of hidden often between new buildings, but there are parts of his experience here that are very different from how we move around the city today, for example. So the painting on the left is a painting that starts really the entryway of the exhibition, the work Approaching a City, which captures the entrance to one of the many entrances to the city, I should say. And this is based on a specific place here in New York, despite the fact that the painting is called Approaching a City. And that is the commuter train underpass that passes through the Bronx and into Manhattan via Park Avenue before cutting underground at this tunnel at 97th Street. I've had many people mention, who grew up in the city, that as kids, they love to kind of stand on Park and 97th and watch the trains go by. So there's something of that fascination here. And also Hopper really trying to capture what he thought of as the thrill, the anxiety, the excitement of entering a major city where you're taking in everything around you, but also looking ahead at this unknown, this dark tunnel ahead. On the right, you'll see a couple of stills from a documentary film from 1916 of an elevated train. This is a part of the city that is no longer extant in most parts of Manhattan, but that during Hopper's time, a very elaborate elevated train system ran along 4 major avenues through Manhattan and into Queens, the Bronx, Brooklyn, along the bridges. And in thinking about the types of views of New York that Hopper was so often capturing, we were interested in thinking about how the particular type of view one has when you're cutting over top of the streets, over top of the sidewalks, and also rather than looking into the maybe shop windows in the lower level, you're actually given access to apartment windows, to office spaces, to these more private interiors. So we wanted to also give you a sense of the overall design of the exhibition. And this is something that we thought about quite a lot. As many of you know, one of the great exciting parts about the Whitney building in its 5th floor space is that there are no supporting columns. So we have no permanent structures within the gallery space in the 5th floor. It's wide open, which means that we often have the opportunity to really design the walls in formations for a specific show, which is what we did here. And you'll see that we've listed the kind of 8 sections that we imagine for the exhibition. And each of those sections has a home within what's a rather open floor plan. The areas of the floor plan that are tinted this kind of light blue color are what we're calling pavilions. And they are really these almost box-like structures that are kind of punctuate the open gallery space and allow for us to have these more focused viewing areas around specific topics like the city and print, theater, etc. And we'll come back to that. And one of the things we wanted to get at with this floor plan was, maybe not to have such a scripted path through the exhibition that this goes to this, goes to this, but rather something that would allow visitors to explore the city as Hopper liked to do so much and to peer around corners and move in and out of these interior spaces. The planning of the exhibition, now here are some of our more behind the scenes snapshots, took place across many forms. And it is actually a project that we began 4 years ago. So you can imagine what has happened in the past 4 years within New York. And the show was actually intended to open in 2021, 1 year ago. So I was laughing when looking at my camera roll on my phone recently to see the image on the left is of this sort of what we call our boards, kind of like image boards that we often keep in our offices as we're preparing for an exhibition, where you have, small versions of the works you're thinking about. You start to move them around and group them. And that was, I think, the snapshot that I took on March 13th, 2020, as I was thinking, I'll probably be out of my office for a couple of weeks. It would be good to have this in mind. Little did we know. And then on the right, you'll see more of a kind of traditional model, a physical model, material model that many curators still, including us, still love to work in, which we were doing in the beginning of this project. And you sort of see those pavilions as these structures in the form there, but really had to give that up along the way as we end up doing much of the planning virtually. So here are 2 of the virtual renders of the projects you see. We work with exceptional exhibition designers. In this case, we worked with the designer Anna Martin and then Jared Huggins, who's currently at the Whitney, who really helped to crystallize the ideas that we had about this project and to do something that not only allowed for this exploratory experience in the space, but also to bring parts of the city into the exhibition because we're downtown, because we're so close to Hopper's home and studio, and because he was walking these streets and avenues that we look out on today. We wanted to ensure that the exhibition didn't feel like it was, enclosed or some kind of other space that was not connected to the city itself. So we wanted to kind of work with designers and also our conservators, of course, who help to protect the artworks from potential light exposure, to allow for places where the gallery windows could actually be open. So moving back, now we'll kind of walk through the exhibition space again. So just reorienting to the introduction to this front wall of a number of Hopper's early impressions of New York. To give you a closer view, here are some of those works. And Hopper grew up in Nyack, New York, which is a Hudson River town about 30 miles north of Manhattan. So that really means that for him, New York City was always in his periphery, even before he began commuting here for art school around 1900. As a child, he came to the city often with his parents to go to the theater. They would come via ferry ride elevated trains. And this was also how he first started coming into the city, again, as a student, where he was commuting from about 1899 to 1906 and ultimately moved here permanently in 1908. So these first impressions capture, the theater, elevated train station, ferry slips, Queensboro Bridge, these kind of glimpses that Hopper was capturing of the city around him. The first pavilion gallery, this is sort of the entrance to that pavilion. We have some installation shots, so you'll see those kind of peppered in here, and then we'll zoom into the works themselves. The first pavilion looks at what we've called the city in print. And this was an opportunity to look at really how Hopper made his living when he first lived in the city and how he really employed his art school training, which involved a lot of work in illustrations, in fact. He did not really gain, I should note this now, he didn't really gain renown as a painter until his mid-40s and until the mid-1920s. So before that time, you imagine he's moved here in 1908, he was doing a number of other projects, many of them for clients for these illustrations. So you see a few of these magazine covers on the left, and also looking at some of the etchings that he was making. These would have been not for clients, so not based on a particular commission, but rather what he would have considered his sort of free work. He was not trained in printmaking in school, but had done a bit of it and really taught himself and studied a number of other printmakers and got help from many other artists around him. And he bought a printing press for his studio in 1916 so that he could really work on this. You imagine he's making etchings, which is really a form of drawing on a plate. We like to think that this is both a place where I should say both in the illustrations and in the prints, a place where he was looking at New York subject matter and also places where he was really honing his compositional skills. In the prints, maybe that's kind of light and shadow. And in the illustration work, in a way, it's almost, how to distill a scene, how to distill images to be legible, to be accessible, and to allow for many different readers to respond to them. We have also within this gallery a great opportunity to look at the importance of his illustration work, which he often dismissed as just pot boilers, just to kind of pay the bills. But to see that he really kept these works, he kept many, many of the tear sheets, the covers of the magazines, everything on display in this gallery is from his own personal holdings. And you see how these pot boilers, in fact, likely had some impact on subjects that he tackled in later painting. So here, an illustration from a magazine known as System, which is today's Business Week, and then a painting that he made in 1940, decades later, but is very much still kind of tapping into those same ideas, that same subject. And give you, again, some behind the scenes work. One of the major projects that we were working on with this Hopper exhibition was also the processing, research, study of the materials in the Sanborn Hopper Archive. And in this, Ferris Wabe, who's pictured at the center on the image in the right, who's our Director of Research Resources, was a tremendously valuable person on this team, really spearheading this work and helping to facilitate our access to it. And you'll also see some other kind of key team members here. In that same image on the right, you'll see on the left, Jared Huggins, our exhibition designer. On the right, Clara Rojas Sebesta, our paper conservator. Even just displaying these magazine covers was a team effort, as you see us kind of trying out different organizations in both the archives in Chelsea and also in the Works and Paper Study Center here at the museum. Here is a shameless plug for our upcoming program, or I should say upcoming set of 2 programs that are titled Hopper on Paper, which we filmed already, but they'll be airing on November 1st and November 8th. You can register for them at whitney.org. The first of which really explore Hopper's printmaking, and this is me with our paper conservator, Clara Rojas Sebesta. And the second is on Hopper's watercolors, which was a discussion between me and the artist Kembui Olajimi. So pulling back again, recentering in the exhibition, you see the film of the elevated train here kind of hanging in the middle of this space as really kind of a place to give our visitors a sense of place. And then focusing in on the next section of the exhibition, which is the window. The window, of course, is a long-held motif used by many, many artists for centuries. We often think about it in relation to artists like Vermeer, where the window could function as a symbol of the kind of connection between public and private spaces. And for Hopper, all of this, certainly, the history of the window in art making absolutely filters through in his work. But he really takes the idea of the city window, the kind of the urban experience, he brings this to the fore. So the painting on the left, for example, Tables for Ladies, we have him really thinking about the fact that in these densely populated urban spaces, windows both frame a view out, as you see in the painting room in Brooklyn on the right, but also are used to frame views in. So in Tables for Ladies, you see the wait staff preparing the window for optimal display in order to entice passersby along the sidewalk, along this part of the city. Hopper talks often about these works being inspired by, restaurants he passed. He's never really specific. And in fact, most of his compositions, as you'll continue to see, are based on experiences, on sensations that he felt in the city and moving around the city, on sketches of details of buildings. But then they're very often, almost always, infused with his imagination and with kind of these fictional or fantastical elements. The window also comes into high relief as this really dynamic compositional device in many of Hopper's paintings of the city at night. And this is where we have this idea that we all know so well in city life, no matter where you live, that when it's nighttime and it's dark outside, when your interior lights are on, everybody can see you. So the interior becomes like a theater, and you have these moments of really incidental voyeurism. And again, also this idea of display. So from the drugstore painting on the left, where you have this very beautiful, almost theatrical storefront display to really highlight this kind of jewel box of this pharmacy, to in the painting in the middle, and even the one on the right, you have these kind of private moments, these domestic moments that are then captured as someone walks by and sees this illuminated interior. Hopper talked a lot about his interest in capturing the challenge of capturing both the exterior and interior of a building at once, which he described as a common visual sensation. This idea of theater, I think, opens up to another one of our focus galleries around the theater. And this is both looking at the theater as a subject, an inspiration, and a pastime. So here in the painting New York Movie, we have Hopper capturing a New York movie house, but it's one that really is a composite of many theaters that he visited. We have a wonderful collection of sketches that he made for this painting, about 53 in total, and in the Whitney's collection, that is. And several of them have his annotations about which theaters he visited: the Globe, the Palace, the Strand, the Republic, in thinking about this painting. In the end, he took details from each and then brought them together into this composite painting of New York Movie, while also utilizing and working with his wife, Josephine, as his model. And I should note here that Josephine really served as his model from the time of their marriage in 1924 through the end of his life. So she is really the model for all the female figures in his paintings, even though he very much transforms her into, a character, into a figure in each one. And she was also an artist and a former actor. So there's a certain agency too in much of her work with her husband here. This is an incredible painting too, as one that you see Hopper really playing this very dynamic composition of, almost slicing the middle of the painting in half. So you get these multiple spaces. It's really about viewing, about spectatorship, and about, different urban experiences in this very public space. For this too, just giving you a glimpse of the type of material that we were looking at. Whitney has a number of these sketches that Hopper made for his painting. So here you're seeing one of many, many days that we spent in our Works on Paper Study Center, looking at all of these amazing works. And I should note that the Works on Paper Study Center is an incredible resource at the Whitney. You can make an appointment to view work here through our website again. And we really encourage visitors. It's a great experience to see works, unframed, unglazed, and to really be able to spend time with them. The theater gallery, this is one of the installation shots of the final gallery, also really taps into some of these archival materials. In this case, ticket stubs that the Hoppers collected over decades of their very common, all the times that they spent in theaters together. They were both really avid theater goers even before they met. So it became one of their favored pastimes as New Yorkers experiencing their city. And what we've been able to do, so you see this installation shot here, and I'll move on to the next slide where you'll see some of these ticket stubs, which the Hoppers collected, and then Edward hand wrote on the back of each of the ticket stubs the specific production that he and Josephine went to see. So this has allowed us to really study so much about their life in the city, both the theaters that they frequented, the places that they often sat in the theaters. You'll see they were largely in the balcony, second balcony. They were sort of famously frugal, but we also like to think that, just as Hopper enjoyed the view of the city from the elevated train, maybe there was something also enticing about looking down at the stage from a slightly elevated perspective. And we've brought together in a slideshow that you saw, I'll go back for 1 second. You see this kind of projected on the wall here. Both images of the theaters, many of the theaters that he frequented, and many of those are no longer extant. As I said, the city is constantly changing. And also many production stills from the specific productions that they saw. This is not meant to create any sort of one-to-one correspondence with paintings, but rather to show that there was a lot in theater display, into theater design at this time that really captured many things that Hopper was getting at in his paintings, the idea of kind of almost designing with an eraser or using light to create dramatic effect. In one particular theater set design by the designer Joe Malziner, and I should plug an essay in our catalog that really looks into a kind of interesting resonance between Malziner's work and Hopper's by David Crane. You see this stage set for the play Street Scene. And this is one that has been talked about in relation to a particular Hopper painting. The Hoppers went to see this production on Valentine's Day in 1929. And then only months later, in early 1930, Hopper paints Early Sunday Morning. And we do know from journals, from Josephine's journals, that Hopper loved that street scene set that he loved so much. So there is something that you imagine could have, again, resonated with him. The next section of the exhibition is a gallery that really looks at this proposal or this almost contrarian view of the city that we're calling the horizontal city. And so we were interested in finding ways to look at Hopper's most iconic works in a new light, or is there something new that we can bring to these works through placing them in the context in which they were made? So with Early Sunday Morning, much has been said about this painting being, in a way like a sort of set, that it's unpeopled, and yet you have the presence of a sort of human presence there, that it captures a sort of very ordinary New York, kind of low-slung, two-story building. It's New York, but it really could be anywhere. Hopper first titles it 7th Avenue Shops in his ledger books, but then ultimately gives it this much more universal title. And then also this kind of looming gray rectangle in the top right corner, which is sort of, the suggestion of construction, of building to come. And of course, this painting, and I'm going to shift to a slide that is really not tiny paintings, but a graphic representation meant to emphasize a point, that at this moment that Hopper was making early Sunday morning, and in fact, these 4 other paintings, right around 1930, this was a really charged moment in the city in which the city was growing tremendously in terms of its heights. So there was a sort of a veritable race to the sky that was covered often in the press. And this is when the Chrysler Building is being built, breaking world records, followed right on its heels by the Empire State Building. And we were thinking, well, this is so interesting that at this moment that Hopper decides to paint this, this group of works. I should say he didn't see these as a group of works, as sort of a series, but he was very particular about the proportions of his canvases. And he writes about the importance of the frame for him. So these 5 canvases, which we'll show you now as installed in the galleries, are all the same proportions, approximately 35 by 60, which is more of a panoramic format than you see most artists using at this time. It harkens back to almost Hudson River School landscape style. And he's capturing here, again, not these landmarks of New York, nothing about this vertical growth, but instead these kind of stretched out, the lateral extent of the city in places like the Manhattan Bridge, the Maycombs Dam Bridge in the Bronx, apartment buildings along the Harlem River, and Roosevelt Island, which at the time was called Blackwell's Island. Quick note to mention here that one wonderful opportunity in the show was to be able to do conservation work on some of the Whitney's paintings and study. And so Matt Skopek, our wonderful paintings conservator, was working very closely with us on much of the preparations for the show. And here is him finally finished working on Apartment Houses East River, which you saw in the previous slide. The next section of the exhibition is one called Sketching New York, which you'll notice that many of there's apartment houses painting, you'll see the sketches for that here. And this is a gallery that really tries to underscore how Hopper captured the city around him, not with a camera, but rather with his pencil and paper. He would often travel around the city on elevated trains. He would set himself up in different parts of the city, especially an area that he thought he might want to work on for a painting, and sketch. And he often returned to the same site. So this gallery really shows him returning to specific sites, preparing paintings, and is a great way, I think, of here you have a sense of the installation of this gallery, of how he was moving all around the city, kind of a passageway through the city and through Hopper's own eyes. The next section of the exhibition looks at Washington Square, which we mentioned previously as being really his home studio for decades. And this is a place where we wanted to look at Washington Square as a site. And for Hopper, that was largely his rooftop. So we sort of started with one of those rooftop watercolors. And here you see that same rooftop watercolor, but within a group of another 3 watercolors. He made very few watercolors in the city. He largely used this as his sort of portable painting medium. And he used it when he was outside the city. He spent his summers typically on the East New England coast, finally settling in Cape Cod with a summer home there in the mid 1930s. But he made 10 watercolors of New York. And so we have a group of 7 of them in the exhibition. And here also looking at the studio itself. So we have a film. You see 2 stills from that film here, where you see Hopper in his side of the studio, I should say, with the windows looking out over Washington Square and at his canvas. And you see on the other side of the studio, Josephine, working on her canvases. And this is how they were set up. They had very, very little space in this home studio residence for living. It was much more about making art for both of them. And here we have both, sketches that Hopper made of the interior of the studio and also some of Josephine's watercolors, as you see on the left, that capture aspects of the studio environment. These are our own snapshots from a visit to the Hopper studio as it stands today, largely preserved and now part of New York University's School of Social Work, but available at times like on appointment, which was a great part of our kind of research and understanding of this space that was so important for the Hoppers. Within this gallery, also, we wanted to look at the Hoppers' role as advocates for the preservation of Washington Square. At the time that they were living there, their own building they were threatened with eviction from their building as New York University was beginning to expand across Washington Square North and other parts of the square. And it became a sort of a personal battle for them to really save this building that had long been a building for artists and writers. John Dos Passos lived there. Rockwell Kent lived there. And also to really try to advocate for the preservation of the whole of Washington Square as a place for artists. So we have here letters that he and Josephine wrote to Robert Moses, pleading for his help, clippings that they were taking from local newspapers about their battle. They ultimately did win the battle, I suppose we could call it, as Josephine liked to say, from NYU, and were able to stay in their apartment at least until their passing, both of their passings, at which time NYU did ultimately take over the building. And here you have kind of in this Washington Square space, a couple of paintings that both show a sort of real Washington Square and a fictionalized one. On the left, you see the sole painting that Hopper made from his rooftop. And this is the painting City Roofs from 1932 that very much captures what he would have seen from his rooftops, including the large building in the back, which is the building 1 Fifth Avenue, the sort of Art Deco apartment building that was being built in the late 1920s, and that was beginning to block his light in his studio, so he was not terribly happy about it. And on the right, a fictionalized view of Washington Square just called The City. We've positioned these paintings next to the windows looking out onto the rooftops of the West Village and our neighborhood here. And we also, just to give a little behind the scenes in the planning for the show. So there's all of the planning you do kind of virtually and with models. But then when you're working with a space with 17.5-foot high ceilings, it's very hard to gauge exactly how that space will feel. And so we had to kind of mock up a number of these spaces with it when the biennial was still on view there. And we have Alex de Cortez' cinema, the kind of the box structure that was built for his film piece that we used as like a mock-up to figure out our ceiling heights for some of these pavilions. And then Melinda and me trying to decide how wide to have the divide between the walls so that we wouldn't let in too much light, but just enough. It worked well in the end. And then this kind of opening up to this last part of the exhibition, which is looking at reality and fantasy, which were really the kind of, I think, key. It seems like these were questions that were really sitting with Hopper at this later part of his career, beginning in the late 1940s and really through the end of his life in the late 60s, where he was beginning, New York at this point becomes much more a backdrop for these much more evocative distillations of urban experience and of people in interiors. So New York is almost what is sort of dropped in through the window to give a work a sense of place, and also provides these almost stage sets or kind of Hollywood backlot New York scenes. The paintings become much stranger, much more abstract, surrealist at moments, especially see Office in a Small City on the right, where Hopper never gives us glass and windows, but here it's really extreme. And this was a moment that we thought was so interesting in thinking about what's happening in New York at this moment, and that you have abstract expressionism happening. Hopper was keenly aware of this, was not a fan, and disliked that it was really, he felt, taking over the museum and gallery system. You have pop art, minimalism. Hopper is still in his studio painting these figurative paintings throughout all of this. And here's sort of one of these like last views from the show, where you see how we've also worked really closely with sight lines to bring different parts of the exhibition together. And one, last note that you'll see when you're here in the galleries, but relates to the kind of planning of the show. See how the space, as you look through that theater space, is kind of lavender. So we wanted to use aspects of the exhibition catalog to help with the organization of the show. And actually, the 8 sections of the show really came out of our thinking in developing the exhibition catalog, of breaking this whole sweep of work into 8 sections. And our designers came up with these kind of tints of color, which then we incorporated into the final exhibition. And here is the exhibition catalog, which has a wonderful group of new authors, including Melinda here, many internal authors and external ones. And I would say for all of us, this was really our first time working on Hopper. So it's a lot of new insights, working with a lot of new research and new resources. And we're really excited to share all of this with you. So with that note, we're really looking forward to questions and thoughts that you may have. We're here to respond.
Thank you, Kim. So we'll jump into the questions now. And Kim, if you don't mind, I'd love to start with one of my own questions for you, which we've talked about this many times throughout the planning of the show. I was thinking while you were talking about some of the behind the scenes aspects, we often had encountered, certain surprises or discoveries, certainly through the archive and our own drawing collection and print collection. Is there a particular discovery that stands out in your mind as having helped shape the exhibition?
Thank you for that question. It's interesting because this is a question that many people have asked in whether it's in tours or kind of conversations about the show. And I think I probably answer it differently every time. And I'm going to answer it differently here again. So one thing that really stuck with me in thinking about capturing Hopper and all of what we know about him, but all that we don't know, is in there's a wonderful, we've included the audio from this incredible television interview that Hopper did with the critic and artist Brian O'Doherty in the mid 1960s. And listening to that audio and hearing Hopper talk, O'Doherty asks Hopper about film, because we know a bit about theater now. We have these ticket stubs, and so we've been able to see the types of productions he went to see. But we really don't know much beyond notebook entries about the movies that he saw. And we knew he was a really avid moviegoer. And as I think one of my favorite lines from that is when O'Doherty's asking him about, are there things he's excited about? And this is 1964. And he says, I'm really interested in a lot of the new French film. And there's a film called Breathless that I've been hearing about, and I'm really excited to see it. So thinking about, we think of Hopper as being sort of conservative in a way, but I love this idea of his, Godard, his, how this later work and this moment where he's tackling all of these, different ideas about, abstraction and perspective in any case. So that is something that really stuck with me.
It makes me think of the ticket stubs as well, which we, of course, saw in the selection of ticket stubs that Hopper held on to, that there were many traditional performances that you all recognize, but then some more controversial and avant-garde performances that were happening at the time. So Hopper was really seeing everything and really taking it in.
Wait, did you have any things that, I'm turning back to you, sorry. Did you have any things that surprised you in the process for you?
I mean, I found it so exciting to understand better how Washington Square was such an important place for both Edward and Joe Hopper, and that they collaborated together in their preservationist efforts. Joe was often writing drafts of letters. So sometimes it was Edward's name on the letter in the end, but they worked together on that. And many of the notebooks in the archive show some of those drafts. And then we have letters even from people like Robert Moses, which is pretty incredible. So it was interesting to think about a little differently about how he cared for his both Washington Square, but also his personal space in the studio. And also, it really relates to today in many ways, artists trying to hold on to their studios and the importance of preserving these artistic communities and legacies. So James asked a really interesting question, I think, that we could start with now. He asked James, what do you believe Hopper's New York can teach us about New York today? Do you want to take that question?
That's a great question. There's a lot of ways to answer this.
Yes.
I think, at least for me, it is a constant reminder of the histories below the surface and between the buildings, and to kind of stay more alert to my surroundings. I think about how it's so common that we now, are writing our emails as we're walking on the sidewalk and kind of missing things along the way. And that I find the city to be just constantly and endlessly fascinating in its histories. And so somehow working on this project, it has prompted me to be more that person who reads the plaques as you are walking by a building, or to notice a building is very strange and to look it up later, or something that's new. So I like to think that it teaches us to really notice what's around us now, but also see the histories, and kind of see it as this kind of constant evolution.
Definitely. So Isabel asks a question about Hopper's sketching and painting practice. This is another good one, more about the timing of Hopper's paintings. Did he make, many works in a single year? I know the answer to this, of course. But if you could, if you want to jump in.
You answer it.
I can answer it, since I know the answer. So we've been kind of interested to see how frequently Hopper made works at the beginning of his career, which was not that frequent. But there was also kind of he often slowed down a bit in later years and would just make, say, by the 50s and 60s, just one painting, two paintings at the very most. And Hopper was someone who really took time thinking about the subjects. He often mentioned that he needed to kind of go to the movies and take a break during a dry spell. He would go on kind of regular movie binges and also see many of the performances we talked about, or just sit in the automat drinking coffee. So he took his time. He was very deliberate about what type of subject he was, looking for. And so I would, over the course of his career, you could say prolific, but not prolific in the way that some artists are.
Right, exactly. No, it's funny. He really only made, around 200 paintings. And even that number is a little fuzzy because of, early paintings, et cetera. But yeah, that's absolutely right. And in the drawing he made many, many drawings. So, even if you only have, two paintings being made in a year, that same year might yield hundreds of drawings. So he was often drawing things that never, would have resulted in a painting, but allowed him to kind of capture aspects of the city around him.
So I'm jumping around a bit here in terms of topics, but I'm seeing a lot of questions from the audience about the archival materials at the Whitney, and asking questions about how can we access that material, how can we do more research in it. We've been very fortunate to have spent a lot of time with the archives, but they are now available to the public with the opening of this show. Do you want to add anything about gaining access to
we are so happy to have this, when an archive comes to an institution, there is this long kind of behind the scenes process of literally processing. And so this is something that we've been working on here, the archives department under Ferris again, for the last few years. And obviously COVID slowed that down a bit. So we're so happy to be at a point where you can now find the finding aid, which is really a guide to all of the items on the Whitney website. We have a great new resource page also about the Edward and Josephine Hopper resources at the Whitney, which is now on our website, which gives a bit of history of Hopper's connection with the Whitney, and also links to a number of these archival materials. So to make an appointment, it is again through our website and reaching out to the museum archives. Be patient. We can only have a few people in at a time, but we are really excited to be able to. There is so many stories that are yet to be told, and we're excited to learn all about them with you.
Mm-hmm. So I know we're getting close to the end of our time, but I'd like to take a couple more questions. I've seen that many audience members are asking about the painting Nighthawks, which is, of course, one of Hopper's most well-known works, and asking specifically if it's in the exhibition, where can I see it? I also know the answer to this question. So I'm playing two roles here. And it is on view at the Art Institute of Chicago, who is the owner of the work. It's in their collection. And you can see it now, I understand. And we haven't had a chance to see the exhibition yet, but
that's right.
Do you want to say more about
its
inclusion?
So Nighthawks could absolutely have been in the show. It is definitely based on a New York subject, even though it's not, again, it's these, one could spend decades trying to figure out exactly a building that Hopper based his work on. And I promise you, it's always going to fall flat in the end because of the way he is, really infusing everything with his imagination in the end. But that said, Nighthawks absolutely fits into the context of this exhibition, but the Art Institute of Chicago has this major reinstallation of their American galleries, which is running concurrent with this exhibition. And Nighthawks, rightly so, is really featured in a central way. I haven't seen the installation yet, but just from the shots, it's like next to Gertrude Abercrombie. It looks like it's a really great presentation. So please see it, but you can't see it in New York. You have to go to Chicago.
So I'm also seeing some questions related to Hopper's use of color. And this makes me think a bit about Hopper's use of light, because, of course, his late use of light really impacted the way he depicted color throughout his paintings. And I know we haven't had a chance so much to talk about Hopper's light and shadow in his work and his later works, which have quite dramatic light shafts and this kind of almost theatrical type of lighting. Do you want to say more about Hopper's use of color, his color palettes, and how it changed over time, or his exploration of light?
Yeah, I would say you'll see this sort of development in Hopper's work. I don't want to say development as a process exactly, but you'll see changes in the way that he is capturing color in his work. I think from the very front wall of the exhibition, which are these kind of early impressions of the work, which are much kind of earthier palette. And then you'll see him really exploring light in different ways and color in his illustration work. And you see the kind of the preparatory watercolors he's making for these in the exhibition, which I think also show him kind of playing with sometimes more like acidic colors and colors that are not necessarily like always based in the world around him. And color gets really exciting in that final gallery, in the reality and fantasy gallery, where you see him, where, light becomes really almost a subject in a lot of these paintings, but the way he's going to capture light is not something, he will talk about how artists try to capture light through like yellows. And he's like, that's not, light is this kind of clear, this white, this pure, tone. You see him showing shafts of light with like almost like an acidic green color, showing shadows with a deep midnight blue. And you see this kind of the consistency of him really developing this particular palette in those later paintings, which is really exciting.
Yeah, there's something so specific to Hopper's color choices.
Yes, definitely.
And use of light, of course.
Definitely.
Well, I think we might be close to time now. So I think we'll wrap up. And Kim, I just want to say it's been a thrill to work on this show. We've had many adventures.
Likewise.
Thanks to your impeccable direction with the curatorial team and all of our colleagues at the Whitney. It's, I think, been a big success. I'm biased, of course. So thank you all for joining us tonight.
Yes.
We really appreciate all of your questions, and we hope you'll come visit the exhibition. It's open until March 5th. So thank you so much, and have a good evening.
Thank you, you too. And thanks to everyone.